She came from Athens, just 17, wrapped in beauty like armor. Irene was sent not for love, but to breed an heir for a dying prince. The halls of Constantinople did not welcome her with warmth, only incense, gold, and cold stares. Her new world smelled of politics, not perfume. She was not chosen for who she was. She was chosen for what she could produce, a son for the empire. Her wedding was grand, a sea of silk and wine, blessed by the patriarch, celebrated by the court. But behind the shimmer was a deal. She would give her body, and in return they would give her power, or so she thought. The imperial bed was no place for affection. It was a battlefield, a throne room in disguise. Irene saw the rules fast. She could age as a silent wife, lost in the shadows, or she could learn how to play. She chose the second path. Leo, her husband, was frail. The blush on his cheeks came not from life, but from fever. And while he withered, she watched. She listened. She studied the empire with ruthless calm. She memorized whispers, tracked servant gossip, read the eyes of eunuchs, and understood the true throne of Byzantium, the one built on secrets. She smiled when expected, promised where needed, and began weaving her web. At its center sat a girl they all mistook for decoration. They did not know she was a predator in purple silk. And when Leo finally died, there were no tears in the palace, only quiet footsteps rushing to pledge loyalty to the woman they had never really seen. Irene, Empress Regent of the Byzantine Empire. Widowhood is dangerous when the woman left behind is smarter than anyone imagined. For Irene, it was not grief but freedom, a sudden liberation from the fragile body she once pretended to obey. Now she set the rules. And the first rule was to never truly be alone. From the shadows emerged a man who would be tied to her fate for years to come. His name was Stavrakios, a eunuch, not a lover or soldier, but something far more useful. He could never be a husband or a father, and that made him perfect. He offered something more precious than heirs. He gave her loyalty sharpened like a dagger, and a mind that could navigate the corridors of power as swiftly as hers. Their meetings were held in silence, in candlelight, after her young son was asleep and the palace fell into stillness. Officially, they discussed matters of state. But those who saw her eyes when Stavrakios entered said it was something deeper. This was not love in the usual sense. It was dependence, dark and intimate. He was her ears, her voice, her hands that quietly removed threats. She shared not her body, but her fears, her ambitions, and her darkest thoughts. In a world where men saw her as a woman to use, Stavrakios saw a goddess to serve. He filled her treasury, gathered loyal officers, whispered the names of those who could be trusted, and those who needed to vanish. Their bond was a spiderweb, with Irene at the center and Stavrakios weaving its threads across the empire. Whether it was love or something more terrifying did not matter. What mattered was that while Constantinople slept, this strange pair, a widowed empress and her devoted eunuch, were rewriting the fate of an empire. Time is the enemy of any regent, because children grow. Constantine, Irene's son, was no longer a boy asleep behind palace doors. He was now a young man, with fire in his blood, ambition in his eyes, and most dangerous of all, a will of his own. He wanted to rule. He wanted a wife of his choosing, not one picked by his mother's counsel. He wanted to breathe air untainted by his mother's control and the constant shadow of Stavrakios. And in that desire for freedom, he signed his own death sentence. Their conflict was not a simple clash between mother and son. It was a suffocating war waged behind golden walls, a duel of eyes across the dinner table, 1,000 tiny stabs hidden in every formal conversation. Irene no longer saw her child. She saw a rival. He was impulsive, inexperienced, but dangerous. Her love for power, forged in sleepless nights with Stavrakios, had become her true obsession. She saw the court gathering around Constantine, the army whispering of a younger, stronger leader. Her web began to tremble. Constantine's first attempt to remove his mother from power was clumsy and doomed, but it gave Irene all the excuse she needed. Now, it was not maternal concern. It was treason. Her response was not a scream, not a sob, but the cold wrath of a serpent whose throne had been threatened. In the silent chambers of her palace, with only Stavrakios as witness, she made her final decision. Some say even her loyal eunuch flinched at what she ordered. But the empress's will was law. The boy emperor was lured into the purple chamber, the very room where he had been born, where heirs to the empire were meant to begin their lives. There, soldiers followed their orders. They took his sight, not his life, removing him from the line of succession with surgical cruelty. Irene crossed the line few ever dared. That day, she stopped being a regent. She became the sole ruler. She became Basilius. She had everything, absolute and undivided power. But at what cost? With her son blinded and removed, Irene stood alone at the top, crowned not as an empress but as Basilius, a male emperor in every sense except flesh. The throne room belonged to her. The army obeyed her. The court feared her. And soon, the whispers began. They said her bedchamber had become the most dangerous room in Constantinople. That the most handsome generals, wealthy noblemen, and even foreign envoys were summoned to her silk-covered chambers by candlelight. But by dawn, they were gone. No titles granted. No favors returned. Only silence. Rumors spread like fire in the markets and the barracks. Some said Irene was a black widow, that to lie with her for one night was to vanish forever. It was seductive. It was terrifying. And it was useful. Because no man dared come close without trembling. Was it true? Likely not. It was an old weapon often used against powerful women, to reduce their authority to carnal hunger. But like all good legends, this one held a shard of disturbing truth. Irene had betrayed her own child for the throne. Could she ever trust another man in her bed? Any man allowed to see her without her crown saw her vulnerable, saw her human. That made them dangerous. And in Byzantium, dangerous men disappeared. Even Stavrakios, her most loyal servant, began to hunger for more. When he showed signs of ambition, she removed him without hesitation. No trial. No spectacle. Just absence. For Irene, intimacy was never romance. It was always a test of loyalty and a calculation of threat. Her true and only lover was power itself. And in the cold silence of her empty bed, she slept like a queen whose body had become a fortress. Not a curse. A defense. With the East under her control, Irene's name echoed across continents, and soon, an offer came that could have changed the fate of the world. Charlemagne, the mighty king of the Franks, ruler of the Western Christian Empire, sent word. He wanted to marry Irene. This was not a gesture of love. It was a political earthquake. Two crowns, East and West, would unite into one empire stretching from the cold shores of England to the burning sands of Syria. One emperor, one empress, one Christian world. And at its heart, Irene. Diplomats moved between Aachen and Constantinople, careful, delicate, orchestrating a new age. It was the most ambitious vision in 1,000 years. Irene stood at the edge of becoming the most powerful woman in human history. But to gain that future, she would have to share her throne. And not just with any man. With Charlemagne, a warrior, a tactician, a man who bowed to no one. He was a mirror of herself, ruthless and commanding. To say yes meant surrendering part of her dominion, becoming wife again, no longer the sole ruler but one half of a cosmic pair. To say no meant solitude, but total command. Each letter from Charlemagne was a question posed to her ego. Compromise or control? In the end, Irene chose silence. She let the greatest alliance in Christendom wither. She could not yield. She would not bend. And in rejecting Charlemagne, she did not just turn down a man. She turned away the future. Her body, once used as a tool for alliances, now became sacred, untouched, inviolable. She had paid too much to own herself. And to keep that ownership, she rejected the world. After rejecting Charlemagne, Irene withdrew deeper into the palace she ruled like a silent storm. If the empire could not be united under one crown, she would tighten her grip on the one she had. And so she perfected her true weapon, the most feared invention of her reign, a network of spies so refined it made the palace itself feel alive. Her eunuchs were no longer just servants. They became her eyes, her ears, her whispering ghosts. They moved without sound, delivering her will, gathering secrets, sensing moods from a glance, and vanishing before anyone could question their presence. They were loyal not because of love, but because she was their only source of power. Without her, they had nothing. In return, she had everything. Her ladies-in-waiting, her bathhouse attendants, the girls brushing the hair of generals' wives, all were extensions of her reach. Every careless word spoken in a whisper, every sigh in a private moment, traveled back to Irene. Gossip in her palace was not entertainment. It was currency. And she spent it with deadly precision. She knew who owed money, who was sleeping with whose wife, who plotted behind her back, and who feared her most. Her control was absolute. The palace lived in glass, but only Irene could see in. To dine with her was both an honor and a sentence, for one never knew if they were summoned for a reward or to disappear. Her rule was built on silk and silence, and her throne sat atop the weight of secrets. But in teaching everyone around her how to serve and spy, she was also teaching them how to replace her. She had designed a perfect system of control. And like all perfect systems, it came with a perfect manual for betrayal. The perfect system she built, the empire of whispers and obedience, turned inward like a blade. Her most trusted official, Nikephoros, the minister of finance, had learned from her better than anyone. He was not her lover, but he was closer than a friend, a co-ruler in shadows. He knew everything. Who received gold, which generals grumbled, which nobles drowned in debt. For years he watched her pull strings and silence threats. He memorized her moves like a devoted pupil. And then, one quiet night he took his final lesson. The coup came not with swords, but with silence. No riots. No battles. Just doors that would not open, guards who would not answer, and servants who vanished into darkness. He had used her own tools. He bribed her watchmen. He whispered to her eunuchs that the time of the Empress had ended. Those who once served her morning drink now simply failed to appear. Irene, once the master of every corridor, now wandered them alone. Her empire, stitched together by fear and silence, had turned mute. Nikephoros came to her after it was done. There were no shouts. No accusations. Just two grandmasters facing the final move. He did not blind her. He did not kill her. That would have been mercy. Instead, he stripped her of the only thing she ever truly loved. Power. The palace became her prison. Her silks were taken. Her voice silenced. Her legacy erased. The man she had trained, trusted, and surrounded with knowledge had taken everything. And in doing so, had delivered the cruelest betrayal of all, not by blade, but by imitation. They sent her to Lesbos, an island once known for poetry and passion, now turned into a cage for a fallen empress. Irene, who once ruled the Christian world, now lived in a single wind-beaten room with no throne, no silk, no voice. Her fingers, which once signed decrees and held the empire's fate, now spun thread for bread. Her skin, once wrapped in imperial purple, now rubbed against coarse wool. The woman who once rewrote the map of an empire now struggled to light a fire against the cold. She had no court, no allies, no godly choir of eunuchs to sing her glory. Only the sound of waves and the weight of memory. Did she think of her blinded son? Of Stavrakios, loyal and later replaced? Of Charlemagne, the ruler she refused? Of Nikephoros, her perfect student who outplayed her? Or did she only think of power, the sensation of bending a world to her will? That memory, sharper than grief, became her final torment. In that empty room, her only lover remained silence. She who had turned every bond into strategy, every touch into transaction, now had nothing left to control. She died in obscurity, with no title, no crown, and no witness. The woman who made emperors vanish, who ruled without a king, who blinded her son for the throne, was now forgotten by the world she once dominated. And yet, her ghost lingers, not in legend or marble, but in the echo of a single question. Was it worth it?